their homes, their skies, their waters. Is adaptation, talking about adaptation in the United States, does it give us sort of a backdoor to actually create more action?
Not really.
On the mission side? No.
No, because we've got a nativist element that gets very excited about any money going overseas. And just by the way, climate change didn't used to be partisan. John McCain ran for president on a terrific climate platform. When I got to the Senate, there were 3 different climate bills kicking around the Senate that were all bipartisan. Bipartisanship died in January of 2010 when the Supreme Court let unlimited corporate money go into politics and the fossil fuel industry stepped in and squashed bipartisanship. I saw the before. Now I'm living the after. If it can be done, it can be undone. And I think it's going to take pressure from groups like this to say, look, if you're a corporation and you want to show up here, bring your carbon political footprint with you. Bring your audit of your carbon political footprint, and then we'll know how serious and sincere you are.
Right, of course. Mr. Thackeray, Aditya, you are the Minister of Climate, Environment, Tourism, state of Maharashtra, one of the most populous states. Mumbai is there, of course. You know what's going on in India right now, personally experienced some of that, including what's happening in Mumbai. Can you share us the view from the ground in India, and then help us understand the kind of investments that you might want to see, government-led investments, private sector-led investments, to really tackle adaptation for a country, with over 1 billion people, and most of whom are very climate vulnerable?
I think, to be honest, no one can give you a real view, because India is a vast country, and you've got many states, you've got many union territories. What is common today, and for all of us across the country, is we cannot predict the weather of tomorrow. And we cannot say why the weather is changing today. We've seen extremes of winters. For a city of Mumbai, we've never had to wear sweaters. This year, we had to put on sweaters at 18 or 19 degrees. Pune was even colder. Summers for us was about 37, 38 degrees max. It is about 43 degrees in April. We don't know how it's going to change. We've had thunderstorms in January. Mumbai, or the western coast really of India, is always known to be a safe harbor. We've got hit by 3 cyclones in 2 years. So these are things that are no longer erratic weather patterns. There is a certain pattern to this, and this is what we are looking at as climate action, or climate change rather. How many of us really are aware of this? Yes, we're aware that there's thunderstorms in Jan. There's rainfall in May. You've had hailstorms in the farm fields in February. All of us are asking for compensation, and rightly so. But going beyond compensation, how many of us are actually aware of why this is happening? How many of us are actually aware beyond the 4 walls of climate talks and the jargons that we have of climate action or under 2 and circular economy, that we need to actually act and change our habits for good and start living for the planet? Initially, and whatever we've heard till now over the past 5 years, 6 years, we've always heard as climate action to be for the next generation. And we've always said that this is for the next generation that we're doing so. But for me, as a 31-year-old out here...
You are the next generation, by the way, compared to me.
Yeah, but there's a generation beyond me. There's another generation.
Even worse.
I know.
Yeah, we're doing it for ourselves,
So what are you doing?
We are actually working, and like he said, rightfully, and like Senator put it out, that we cannot just be focusing on adaptation. Our focus has to be 100% mitigation, 100% adaptation. We cannot be even dividing 50-50 between the both. It's for us to actually act today. We do not have the luxury of time. We see a lot of goal setting by corporates, a lot of goal setting by policymakers saying, okay, we'll do it in 2050, we'll do it in 2040. That is all great. But if we don't hit 2040, what are we going to do? It's for us to act now. We need to start walking our way towards 2040. I'll give you a small example. The city of Mumbai, we've got 3,337 buses today. Most of them are CNG buses. About 186 are diesel. 386 electric. And electric started off when my fascination with electric buses started off way back in 2012. I was 22 years old. I was visiting London. I saw this electric double-decker bus. I said, wow, this is beautiful because it has no sound and you can stand behind it and there's no bad air around it. So we got our first 6 buses in the summer of 2015. Today we have 386. While on my way here, we've tendered out 900 double-decker electric buses, 2,100 single-decker electric buses. But the target for people to bus ratio, public transport ratio, has to be much more for our city. So we are actually trying to hit 10,000 electric buses on our streets by 2026. For the state, about 20,000 electric buses by 2026. And we're just, changing our buses. It's actually working out for us because the economics of it all, in terms of comparing it with diesel and fuel, fossil fuel to what electric mobility is giving us and the charges of clean energy, is actually much better for us. So we might hit profits for a public transport system as cheap as 5 rupees for 5 kilometers in the next 2 years in a history of 75 years. So these are some of the things that we've been working on. And in terms of course, and we're trying for mitigation. Apart from this, we've got 15 conservation reserves declared, 3 sanctuaries, 2 Ramsar sites. We're going for 1 more. Next week, we'll be having about 19 more conservation reserves. We've already got about 15,000 hectares of mangrove land protected as forests in the last 11 months. So these are some of the things we're doing for mitigation. But yes, the other side of it, adaptation, like you said, hydrating. These are some things that we have to go towards. And for us and our part of the world, it's not just going to be heating. It's going to be heating during winters and cooling during summer. So we've got to deal with 2 extremes. And how does it work out for the real estate industry for us? How does it work out for affordable homes? How does it work out for people who do not have the luxury to stay in formal homes? We've got slums, we've got informal homes, we've got areas which are not even connected. So for us, we've got to maintain between a welfare state, development, and sustainable development. I think that is what we're really battling on. Yeah. City of Mumbai facing 200 mm of rain sometimes per hour. We're slashed and lashed by rain. We've started creating rainwater holding ponds. We started creating stormwater drains that are actually bigger than 50 mm per hour, which is standard across the world. We've had to have pumping stations. And we're tackling between the both. So I think it's a matter of survival for all of us. And the faster we realize that we're in the midst of a climate emergency, better for us.
Right. Minister, I just want to bring in someone who works in the nonprofit sector. Sheila Patel runs one of the largest NGOs in India, particularly works in Maharashtra as well. Can you give us a little bit of just 1 or 2 minutes because we're short on time? But do you mind sharing just your perspective on the work that you're doing and what it looks like on the ground from where you are? Sheila, there's
Thank you. Our minister's here. I'm in good space.
But you do know he works for you, right?
Yes, I
Yeah,
do.
good, okay.
I just met her. Yeah.
I think that I speak on behalf of my larger network, which is Shack Dwellers International, which works in 30... Oh, I'm so sorry. Sorry. I have a loud voice. We work in 33 countries and over 300 cities.
And it's called Shack Dwellers
Shack
International.
Dwellers International.
Love it.
I think I come here with a deep demand for acknowledgement that poor people are also not just sitting on their haunches waiting for climate to destroy their lives. We see ourselves as partners in the change. We see ourselves as people who, in most circumstances, have built our own houses, designed our own work and livelihood. And we are looking at ways by which we can align with not only what the state is doing for us, but make demands on the state to do it in a way where we are partners. Mm-hmm. I think that's the deficit that's there, which is the engagement. Not every minister I meet, I can grab his hand and say, meet this one, meet that one. But I think that that's the future. You're battling with your lobbies. We are fighting with mindsets where informality has been deemed illegal, has been marginalized. And we have such a large deficit that now is a burden of the climate change, social justice part. And I think that's the double whammy that we have to deal in adaptation. And therefore, for us, adaptation means every citizen making choices of transformation that you said took millenniums to do, we have to do in the next 3 years as far as we're concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. I appreciate those thoughts. Emily, I want to come to you next. You work at Cambridge Zero. You're the director there at Cambridge University. You've worked on innovation, and we all know, and we talk, especially at the WEF Forum, about how innovation can be transformative and can reduce this climate adaptation gap that you see here, and is a positive for the economy as well. What do you see as the biggest opportunity to leverage innovation to make real progress on adaptation and close this gap?
Yeah, actually, Let me just first pick up on something you said in your introductory remarks. You said that you were an optimist, and as an optimist, you thought we should aim for 1.5 with actually getting somewhere to 2.3 degrees of warming. I'm a climate scientist, and I've spent more than a decade studying the polar regions. If we reach that level of temperature rise, there's a real risk that the Greenland and West Antarctic ice sheets will not be intact, which would lead to many meters of sea level rise eventually and put us beyond the zone at which any of us would be able to adapt. So I don't think that's really an optimistic future at all, and one we should absolutely be looking to avoid. In terms of innovation and how innovation, though, can help in terms of adaptation, there are huge opportunities in terms of the way in which innovation can help us. First of all, to characterize and understand the risks. There's ever-increasing data sets that we have from satellites or from a whole host of different measurements around the world that we're increasingly integrating together using the latest artificial intelligence, machine learning techniques to better characterize what the risks for climate are at a local level and therefore what we need to be adapting to. We're also increasingly using science, innovation, and technology to help design solutions, whether that's in terms of using the latest understanding in crop science to help design more resilient staple foods crops, whether it's about using the latest technology to develop digital twins so that we can understand at a much more systemic nature how to make many, many different aspects of our lives more resilient, or whether it's about how we can use technology both to monitor potential solutions, whether those are nature-based solutions, looking at how we can use mangrove both to help on the mitigation side as well as the adaptation side of solutions, how we can use technology to monitor those and then also to link it through to financial mechanisms so that we get that pathway from solution to the financing of the solutions together, connected together through technology. But in terms of where there's a real opportunity, and the key opportunity on all of this, I think, is actually innovation around radical collaboration. We are only going to be able to design adaptation strategies that are actually effective if we do so in collaboration, if we draw on local knowledge, often traditional knowledge, integrating that together with innovation on the technology side, if we bring together the public and the private and the sectors together with the NGO sectors as well, so that we holistically understand what the challenges are and how to best respond to them.
And is it happening fast enough? I mean, what you're painting is something no one is going to argue against. But I guess my question is it happening fast enough?
It's not happening fast enough either on the mitigation or the adaptation side. I mean, we know, you asked me a question you already know the answer to. Yeah. We've been hearing about the scale of the impacts of climate change that are already happening around the world, destroying lives and livelihoods around the world. We are, if we don't continue, if we don't really accelerate our response, both on the mitigation side and on the adaptation side, we're simply not going to have a livable planet for people or for nature.
I want to turn to Will, if you would mind, just 1 or 2 minutes very quickly. Talking about, technology, I'm a big fan of what William Marston, he's the co-founder and CEO of Planet Lab. And Planet Lab provides, data and visualization of everything from deforestation to ag land to events that are happening right now in real time. You're scaling dramatically. Your company went public not very long ago. Do you see the ability to scale there, and how are you using this technology to really push on the adaptation front?
Well, absolutely. So, I mean, most of our efforts, I mean, you can't manage what you don't measure, right? I mean, it comes back to that. And both on the mitigation side and the adaptation side, we need better data to underpin our activities on the climate front. As well as on the biodiversity front, which are equally in need of data sets. So we launched a fleet of satellites that image the whole Earth every day because on the basis that we need data on the timescale of human interventions, not wake up at the end of the year and there's a big hole in the Amazon, but do something about it because we have the day-to-day tracking of deforestation. It's more on the mitigation side, but on the adaptation side, there's a few things that we can do, and we've had a few examples of this. One is helping reduce human suffering in times of actual catastrophes, so floods and fires and so on. Of course, quick imagery afterwards, which helps countries bring their emergency services, but also having the imagery from the day before that helps them know what happened. That turns out to be equally important as the image the day before the flood or the fire, what was there, and so on. The second thing is prevention of those things. So we're working with California counties on looking at where there's too much fodder for future megafires and helping them with clearing. Or we're doing some work with Google on tracking where the floodplains change every year in India to help then point out where there's now infrastructure in the floodplain. So then you can help people to get out of that way. And then the third area is just about transparency and awareness about this. One of the great things about satellite imagery is that it's a complete unbiased layer on what's going on, and people can understand it. You can see a flood and they can understand it. They can see damage to a building, they can understand it. It brings people closer to the event. A lot of these things feel very abstract. There's 4 levels of abstraction between this and what actually matters, and so the visual imagery can a little bit bring us closer to the events all around the world. So,
how many satellites do you guys have up now? If it's not a trade secret.
Just over. Well, actually, I don't know. This is about just over 200. I'm probably the only person on the planet that doesn't know how many satellites they have, but it's over 200 at this point. One that does the scanning of the whole Earth every day, and then we have 21 high-resolution satellites that zoom in any particular location up to 10 times per day.
Great. Thank you very much for that. So let's turn to the financial sector, Bart. Financial services can clearly play a key role in adaptation, and we need massive amounts of financing to actually move some of these efforts at scale, particularly with cities, for example. How is the JS and other insurance groups innovating on climate risk and insurance products in terms of trying to price in that cost of adaptation?
Well, let me maybe first of all pick in on some of the topics I heard and make the link to the financial industry. I think the only way to get ahead and to solve the issues we all recognize is a collaboration between all the stakeholders. So it's about the governments, it's about the companies, it's about the end customers, so that everybody is convinced to move forward. If I then look to the financial industry, and of course I'm coming out of the insurance industry, which is much more mainly those that are involved in the life insurance business, long-term investors. So we'd say we would love to have more infrastructure projects to be able to invest the money that customers give us to be invested in long term, to invest them in long-term projects. And if I look to our own country, in Belgium, we more have to go to projects in the UK, in the Netherlands, in Germany, in France, because there are not enough opportunities, although we see some of them. To give some examples, we have been proposing to build big water collectors in case of heavy floodings or rain or storm, to then reuse it in terms of lack of water, like we have now in many areas, not only in Europe, but also outside. That's one. What we also try to do is, so we have a lot of billions available to make these investments, and we're talking to governments. Of course, we do it in the countries where we are, which is in Europe and in 9 Asian countries. So that's one. The second thing we try to do is, and that's more linking to the point that the lady from India mentioned, we have an ambition for ourselves, our own group, that by 2024, 25 of the premium we collect from our customers must be for products that stimulate the customer to go to more sustainable choices. And it's about driving less, it's about investing more in the, let's say, the necessary development of the house to be more climate, let's say, friendly. These things we try to do. We have had, for instance, in the floodings in Belgium and the UK over the last years, we have been proposing people to invest when we rebuild in the adaptation to avoid the damage in the future. To give maybe a negative example, we had something like 100 houses to be rebuilt in the Walloon region in Belgium. We were willing to build them in another place, more expensive, but nor the people themselves nor the local politicians were very in favor of that, because they say you cannot take away people from their normal habitat, where we say, okay, yeah, you just leave them there where they risk to have within a number of years the same unfortunate situation. So I think financial industry has a lot of means to go into projects that, not for mitigation only, but for adaptation. And there we strongly believe, like the Minister Shukri said, in public-private collaboration. Secondly, we of course have a big impact in do the investment choices we made in our investment portfolios to stimulate corporates to have the right behavior. Already today, every investment we do is screened against the principles of responsible investment. If we have a share that we do not invest in, we interact with that company to tell why we don't buy that share. So if the financial industry is doing that more and more, the behavior of the corporates, where it's still needed, Mr. Senator, we hope will improve.
Yeah, fair point, fair point. Coming to the Senator again, you know, talking about finance, and I mean, this is almost a sad question to ask, because the question as written here says, basically, climate resilience initiatives have not drawn as much finance as emissions reduction projects. We know that those haven't drawn enough finance either. But when we think about climate adaptation, you know, any thoughts you have on how we might try and incentivize climate adaptation from a financial perspective?
I think for a lot of places, it's going to be important that there be security for the investment, financial security, political security, physical security. So to think of climate in terms of its effect on the security environment, you could end up in a situation in which the places that are having the most catastrophic need for adaptation are being so disrupted by it that you then have an unwillingness to put the investment in because it's hard to protect the investors who are behind the investment. So the quicker you can get in there ahead of those problems becoming that acute is necessary, and the sooner you can provide guarantees that support, they may even be insurance products, that support those investments so that you can offset that additional risk that is unrelated to the product itself. It's related to its location, it's related to its political environment, it's related to the security risks that surround it. And I think people who are doing this have to look at this as a much more complicated thing. If somebody wants to invest in, you know, Rhode Island, it's pretty straightforward as long as you're careful about being too close to the shore, since we're going to have that flooding that we talked about. But other places, it's much more challenging, and making sure we have those challenges addressed in advance, I think, is going to be the requirement. And I think the private sector is going to tell us what they need, so we have to listen and set it up.
We're almost coming to the end of the session. I'd like to take 2 minutes for each one of you, give you 2 minutes to basically reflect. You know, I'm framing this as 6 months, partly because we have this amazing opportunity here of having the minister here with us, who, you know, obviously is not the only person in charge, but certainly shapes the agenda for the next COP, and then carries the presidency on to UAE once that term is over, and UAE, I think, is on COP28. What would you say, concrete action, 1 or 2 concrete actions that you can think are required in the next 6 months to make sure that not just stay the course on adaptation, but we accelerate the course on adaptation? And Bart, I'm going to just start with you, and then
I would give two points. The first one is what we call the say-do gap. So we all have governments, companies, big ambitions where to reach in 2050. I miss a bit concrete actions to get there. And the second one is to really bring all the parties together, to work together, and not them and us. And that's why we are a very strong believer of more public-private collaboration.
Yeah, but I mean, I have to emphasize that one thing you said, because I'm just taking off my moderator hat for a minute, and you know, I am always puzzled when corporate CEOs make commitments out to 2050, knowing that the average lifespan of a corporate CEO is like 4.5 years or 5 years. And the fact that they are willing to say what's going to happen to that company in 2050 is obviously, you know, pie in the sky. But, so of course you need those long-term goals. You need a marker. But, you know, to your point, we need to know what's happening in 2025, in 2030. That's, for me, what's more interesting, right?
But for corporates, but also for governments, because politicians also have a tenure of not until 2050.
Yes. With governments, I'll take any commitment I can get. All right. So I stand corrected. I wasn't trying to sort of suggest that 2.3.
No, but my point is, is
no, of course.
A planned approach. They say we want to be there in 2024, 2028.
Yes, perfectly right. I completely agree with you, Emily. I don't mean to suggest that 2.3 is by in any means acceptable. I want it to be zero. It needs to eventually get down to zero. I mean, we need to be very comfortable with the word zero. You know, zero waste, zero emissions. I mean, the planet absolutely requires that, right? There's no way out of that trap. Now, having said that, you know, I think 1.5 is we can't go above it, and we must not try to go above it. But at the same time, we have to plan for that 1.5 impact on adaptation, and if God forbid we exceed it, we need to be ready as well. So what would you say is a concrete actions that you can think of in the next 6 months we ought to be thinking about on the road to Sharm el-Sheikh?
So, you know, as a world, we're still battling the pandemic. We've then had the terrible conflict in the Ukraine. Climate change sits on top of all of that, and it is the most predictable, but also the most preventable global crisis. We know that it is something that we need to respond to, and we have to respond to it both through mitigation and adaptation. We need to ensure we don't go above 1.5 degrees of warming. But even at 1.5 degrees, we will have even greater impacts than we are already seeing around the world. And so we absolutely need to be looking at how to adapt as well. And if there is one thing that I think is absolutely central in these next 6 months, is a real recognition that adaptation has to be equal to mitigation in terms of the seriousness with which it is taken. There are so many countries of the world who really have not been the cause of the problem, but very much are the centre of the problem. And we need to make sure that, you know, when we come to COP27, that adaptation is given its rightful recognition as being a really important part, without in any way taking our eye off the ball on the mitigation side of things.
Fantastic. Thank you, Emily. Minister Thackeray, 6 months. What would you like to see done in your own state? But then what should we also keep our eye on as we head into the next COP?
So I think a couple of specific asks. One is, of course, awareness, because, you know, like I said, a lot of this is still in 4 walls. And what, you know, she was mentioning, or what I've been hearing in terms of, you know, the effects of climate change and 1.5, 2, we really need to get out there with the political talk about climate action. We need to have, you know, talk in every age group, every corporate sector, political sector, try to make this more mainstream. So that is one. 2, global forums like these, especially like the WEF, because, you know, I was at Davos, I was at COP26 also. And what is beautiful there is you had national governments, you had subnational governments, you had NGOs, you had a lot of partner agencies coming together. Yeah, I think all of that with the corporate world coming together, you would have policy with implementation. So I think we need more of these meetings coming together. The third thing is we've always heard about you know, billions of dollars available for climate action and green finance. But none of us around the world know how to tap into that. So if we can actually have more specific ways to tap into those, showing concrete plans and showing, you know, peer-reviewed measures that are taking place on ground, I think that'll be easier for us to actually act. And 4, along with national governments, if we could have regional or subnational governments coming onto bigger forums, especially for countries like us, where we have many states and where something like Maharashtra has 120 million people, 60 million of us living in 43 cities that are million plus, 50% of us urbanized. You have a manufacturing industry, you have an agrarian economy, 720 kilometers of coastline. I think we need to have regional governments and subnational governments being a part of it all. So these are some of the things that I thought were crucial for as we move towards next COP.
Do you have any thoughts, and I might be interested to hear what the minister had to say on this too, that you raised a really interesting point about commitments that are made on the stage. And I think they're generally well-meaning commitments that then there's a huge gap between the commitment that's made and the money that shows up, and then how nonprofits, how the governments, and how the private sector can actually access those funds. So any thoughts on trying to streamline that?
Absolutely. There are two types of commitments that can be made. One is, of course, the financial commitments, which partner agencies, financial hubs, or countries around the world can commit. And you could have a forum where national governments, subnational governments, local bodies, urban or rural, could apply with specific programs for mitigation and adaptation, and you could tap into that. I think that, if streamlined, could be a huge potential force for adaptation, because most of the cities around the world or regions do not know how to finance the requirements for climate action, be it mitigation or adaptation. So that is one. The other is, when we come to forums like these or gatherings like these, you've got the biggest of the ideas and the biggest of the groups having some phenomenal ideas, and you also have some brilliant startups and younger disruptors who want to come around with ideas. Now, typically what has been said is the lighthouse projects or the pilot projects. But we need to go beyond that. We need scalability, we need affordability, we need implementation of these projects. Now, if there could be a forum for innovations, disruptions, research, development on climate action, I think financial and non-financial. So I think if we could have forums set up for that in terms of globally and have a streamlined mechanism for top-bottom or bottom-top approach to tap into that, that could really help us around the world.
Yep, great. Senator Whitehouse, final word.
I would love two things. I would love to have every corporation applying to attend the COP have to staple to its application an audited report on its own climate political footprint.
That's a good idea.
Make them do it. Lobbying, electioneering, trade associations, the whole bit. And then that'll be a good sincerity test for some of these commitments. If that's who they are, then there wouldn't be much help to have them. I think CEOs will learn a lot when they see it, because I think a lot of this is happening in the dark, and CEOs aren't paying attention. They'll be horrified to know how badly they're behaving in Congress when they actually see the audited report. So that would be one. And the second would be that we beat them anyway, and by the time of the COP, we have serious climate legislation that has passed in the United States Congress that helps with carbon border adjustment, that helps with carbon pricing, and that funds the international climate funds.
All right, I'm an optimist, but do you...
We're very close. We are very close.
You believe that?
We're very close.
All right. Fantastic.
And if I didn't believe it, I'd have to go find some other line of work, because what I do is persist through disappointment.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate folks for coming. Do you have any final words to share with us? There's a microphone.
Really enlightening.
Sorry.
I have to also refer to the fact that, our ambition is really, really, really minuscule. We keep on talking about bridging the gap, and as if it's a great achievement if we were to fulfill the 100 billion goal for mitigation, and that we have a similar arbitrary number for adaptation, and both are inconsequential. We all know that, but we are all repeating the jargon as relates. If we don't really raise our ambition, and I fully associate with, if we go beyond the 1.5 to 2 degrees, the game is over. We won't be able to come back from the devastating effects. And thereby, if all of us, both government, private sector, NGOs, don't recognize this, we're really going to leave a very damaged planet for future generations. So we have to live up to what we say and really put things in perspective.
But you're not suggesting that the 100 billion, which I think was promised in Copenhagen, must be, and still hasn't been delivered. You're not suggesting you're suggesting we should increase that ambition, but we still need to get there. Because
yes, but the objective isn't getting there. Even if we get there, what effect will it have on climate change? And we all know that it's going to be a minuscule effect. So are we serious? We expend the time to speak about the 100 billion, getting to the 100 billion, trying to create the transparency and alleviating the manipulation of accounting that's going on. And we all see this. It's not something that is hidden away from our attention. But we're really not rising to the level of what needs to be done. And maybe a more candid discussion on these issues would be more relevant. And I take what the Senator is saying about the presence of the corporate world in COP. We will be trying to vet as much as possible and create the necessary, let us say, criteria that makes it possible for them who have a story to tell, who have a contribution, and who have been serious in the way they are addressing this issue.
I guess the reason why sometimes I tend to focus on that 100 billion is because I feel like it's a promise that was made. And if you're in the global south, the entire framework of the COP is based on trust. And, these small countries are being asked to do a lot. And, I feel like the developed nation, the global north, needs to do at least its minimal part that it's already promised to do. So I think that for me, I agree with you about the arbitrary nature of it and the fact that it is a drop in the, in the ocean, so to speak. But there is a sense of trust that is being broken. And when we want multilateralism, when it makes sense for us, we want multilateralism. But this one way of being multilateral, which is helping smaller countries sort of at least meet the minimum obligation we set out to do, I think is hugely important.
And the talk about adaptation implies that this is something we can successfully adapt to. And check out the creatures of the Permian collapse to see how well significant dislocations in planetary systems worked for adaptation.
Absolutely.
We've got to stop it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everyone. I know it's been a long day. This has been a terrific discussion. We really appreciate it.